GrannyDee Squirrel Squad listeners. How are you this fine day? It's hump day. And yay, that means we got live at 5 today. Woohoo! And my daughter's coming, Hannah, to spend the night. Yay, yay, yay. Chapter 4, Windy Poplar, Spooks Lane, Seaside. November 10th. Dearest, it used to be that the person I hated most in the world was the person who spoiled my pen nib. But I can't hate Rebecca Dew in spite of her habit of using my pen to copy recipes when I'm in school. She's been doing it again, and as a result, you won't get a long or loving letter this time, belovedest. The last cricket song has been sung. The evenings are so chilly now that I have a small, chubby, oblong wood stove in my room. Rebecca Dew put it up. I forgive her the pen for it. There's nothing that woman can't do, and she always has a fire lighted for me in it when I come home from school. It's the tiniest of stoves. I could pick it up in my hands. It looks just like a pert little black dog on its 4 bandy iron legs. But when you fill it with hardwood sticks, it blooms rosy red and throws a wonderful heat. And you can't think how cozy it is. I'm sitting before it now with my feet on its tiny hearth, scribbling to you on my knee. Everyone else in Seaside, more or less, is at the Hardy Pringles dance. I was not invited, and Rebecca Dew is so cross about it that I'd hate to be Dusty Miller. But when I think of Hardy's daughter Myra, beautiful and brainless, trying to prove in an examination paper that the angles at the base of the isosceles triangle are equal instead of angles, I forgive the entire Pringle clan. And last week she included gallows tree quite seriously in a list of trees. Oh no. But, to be just, all the howlers don't originate with the Pringles. Blake Fenton defined an alligator recently as a large kind of insect. Such are the highlights of a teacher's life. And oh, how I remember some spelling funnies. And others too, but I remember like angels for angles and vice versa. Feels like snow tonight. I like an evening when it feels like snow. The wind is blowing in turret and tree and making my cozy room seem even cozier. The last golden leaf will be blown from the aspens tonight. I think I've been invited to supper everywhere by now. I mean to the homes of all my pupils, both in town and country, and that was something that they used to do with the teachers. And oh, Gilbert, darling, I'm so sick of pumpkin preserves. Never, never let us have pumpkin preserves in our house of dreams. Almost everywhere I've gone for the last month, I've had PP for supper. Pumpkin preserves. The first time I had it, I loved it. It was so golden that I felt I was eating preserved sunshine, and I incautiously raved about it. It got brooded about that I was very fond of PP, and then people had it on purpose for me. Last night, I was going to Mr. Hamilton's, and Rebecca Dew assured me that I wouldn't have to eat PP there because none of the Hamiltons liked it. But when we sat down to supper, there on the sideboard was the inevitable cut glass bowl full of PP. I hadn't any pumpkin preserves of my own, said Mrs. Hamilton, ladling me out a generous dishful. But I heard you was terrible partial to it, so when I was at my cousin's in Lowville last Sunday, I says to her, I'm having Miss Shirley to supper this week, and she's terrible partial to pumpkin preserves. I wish you'd lend me a jar for her. So she did, and here it is, and you could take home what's left. You You should have seen Rebecca Dew's face when I arrived home from the Hamiltons bearing a glass jar 2/3 full of pee-pee. Nobody likes it here, so we buried it darkly at the dead of night in the garden. Oh my gosh. You won't put this in a story, will you? She asked anxiously. Ever since Rebecca Dew discovered that I do an occasional bit of fiction for the magazine, she has lived in fear or hope, I don't know which, that I'll put everything that happens at Wendy Poplar's into a story. She wants me to write up the Pringles and blister them, but alas, it's the Pringles that are doing the blistering, and between them and my work in school, I have scant time for writing fiction. There are only withered leaves and frosted stems in the garden now. Rebecca Dew has done the standard roses up in straw and potato bags, and in twilight they look exactly like a group of humpback old men leaning on staffs. I got a postcard from Davy today with 10 kisses crossed on it and a letter from Priscilla written on some paper that a friend of hers in Japan sent her. Silky thin paper with dim cherry blossoms on it like ghosts. I'm beginning to have my suspicions about that friend of hers. But your big fat letter was the purple gift the day gave me. I read it 4 times over to get every bit of its savor, like a dog polishing off a plate. That certainly isn't a romantic simile, but it's the one that just popped into my head. Still, letters, even the nicest, aren't satisfactory. I want to see you. I'm glad it's only 5 weeks to Christmas holidays. And that's all of chapter 4, and since it was only under 7 minutes, I'll go on chapter 5. But chapter 5, I think I checked, and it was a long one. Black cherry cartridge. Circle. Love this bottle. It gets me to drink my water. Okay, chapter 5. Anne, sitting at her tower window one late November evening with her pen at her lip and dreams in her eyes, looked out on the twilight world and suddenly thought she would like a walk to the old graveyard. She'd never visited it yet, preferring the Birch and Maple Grove or the Harbor Road for her evening rambles. But there is always a November space after the leaves have fallen when she felt it was almost indecent to intrude on the woods, for their glory terrestrial had departed, and their glory celestial of spirit and purity and whiteness had not yet come upon them, so Anne betook herself to the graveyard instead. She was feeling for the time so dispirited and hopeless that she thought a graveyard would be a comparatively cheerful place. Besides, it was full of Pringles, so Rebecca Dew said. They had buried there for generations, keeping it up in preference to the new graveyard until no more of them could be squeezed in. Anne felt that it would be positively encouraged to see how many Pringles were where they couldn't annoy anybody anymore. The Pringles are planted there. In regard to the Pringles, Anne felt that she was at the end of her tether. More and more, the whole situation was coming to seem like a nightmare. The subtle campaign of insubordination and disrespect which Jen Pringle had organized had at last come to a head. One day, a week previously, she had asked the seniors to write a composition on the most important happenings of the week. Jen Pringle had written a brilliant one, the little imp was clever, and had inserted in it a sly insult to her teacher, one so pointed it was impossible to ignore it. Anne had sent her home, telling her that she would have to apologize before she would be allowed to come back. The fat was fairly in the fire. Oh, darn. It was open warfare now between her and the Pringles, and poor Anne had no doubt on whose banner victory would perch. The school board would back the Pringles up, and she would be given her choice between letting Jen come back or being asked to resign. She felt very bitter. She had done her best, and she knew she could have succeeded if she had had even a fighting chance. It's not my fault, she thought miserably. Who could succeed against such a phalanx and such phalanx? PHALANX and such tactics. But to go home to Green Gables defeated, to endure Mrs. Lynde's indignation and the Pye's exultation, even the sympathy of friends would be in anguish. And with her Summerside failure, Summerside, that's what the society is, brooded abroad, she would never be able to get another school, but at least they had not got the better of her in the matter of the play. Anne laughed a little wickedly, and her eyes filled with mischievous delight over the memory. She had organized a high school dramatic club and directed it, and a little play hurriedly gotten up to provide some funds for one of her pet schemes, buying some good engravings for the rooms. She had made herself ask Catherine Brooke to help her because Catherine always seemed so left out of everything. She could not help regretting it many times, for Catherine was even more brusque and sarcastic than usual. She seldom let a practice pass without some corrosive remark, and she overworked her eyebrows. Worse still, it was Catherine who had insisted on having Jen Pringle take the part of Mary, Queen of Scots. "There's no one else in the school who can play it," she said impatiently. No one who has the necessary personality." Anne was not so sure of this. She rather thought that Sophie Sinclair, who was tall, had hazel eyes, and rich chestnut hair, would make a far better Queen Mary than Jen. But Sophie was not even a member of the club and had never taken part in a play. "We don't want absolute greenhorns in this. I'm not going to be associated with anything that's not successful," Catherine had said disagreeably, and Anne had yielded. She could not deny that Jen was very good in the part. She had a natural flair for acting, and she apparently threw herself into it wholeheartedly. They practiced 4 evenings a week, and on the surface things went along very smoothly. Jen seemed to be so interested in her part that she behaved herself as far as the play was concerned. Anne did not meddle with her, but left her to Catherine's coaching. Once or twice, though, she surprised a certain look of sly triumph on Jen's face that puzzled her. She could not guess just what it was. One afternoon, soon after the practices had begun, Anne found Sophie Sinclair in tears in the corner of the girls' coat room. At first she had blinked her hazel eyes vigorously and denied it, but then she broke down. "I did so want to be in the play, to be Queen Mary," she sobbed. "I've never had a chance. Father wouldn't let me join in the club because there are dues to pay and every cent counts so much. And of course I haven't had any experience. I've always loved Queen Mary. Her very name just thrills me to my fingertips. I never will believe she had anything to do with murdering Darnley. It would have been wonderful to fancy I was she for a little while." Afterwards Anne concluded that it was her guardian angel who prompted her reply. "I'll write the part out for you, Sophie, and coach you in it. It will be good training for you, and as we plan to give the play in other places, if it goes well here, it will be just as well to have an understudy in case Jen shouldn't always be able to go, but we'll say nothing about it to anyone." Sophie had the part memorized by the next day. She went home to Windy Poplars with Anne every afternoon when school came out, and rehearsed it in the tower. They had a lot of fun together, for Sophie was full of quiet vivacity. The play was to be put on the last Friday in November in the town hall. It was widely advertised, and the reserved seats were sold to the last one. Anne and Catherine spent 2 evenings decorating the hall. The band was hired, and a noted soprano was coming up from Charlottetown to sing between the acts. The dress rehearsal was a success. Jen was really excellent, and the whole cast played up to her. Friday morning, Jen was not in school, and in the afternoon, her mother sent word that Jen was ill with a very sore throat. They were afraid it was tonsillitis. Everybody concerned was very sorry, but it was out of the question that she should take part in the play that night. Catherine and Anne stared at each other, drawn together for once in their common dismay. "We'll have to put it off," said Catherine slowly, "and that means failure. Once we're into December, there's so much going on. Well, I always thought it was foolish to try to get up a play this time of year." "We are not going to postpone it," said Anne, her eyes as green as Jen's own. She was not going to say it to Catherine Brooks, but she knew it as well as she'd ever known. As well as she had known anything in her life, that Jen Pringle was in no more danger of tonsillitis than she was. It was a deliberate device, whether any of the other Pringles were a party to it or not, to ruin the play, because she, Anne Shirley, had sponsored it. "Oh, if you feel that way about it," said Catherine with a nasty shrug, "but what do you intend to do? Get someone to read the part? That would ruin it. Mary is the whole play." "Sophie Sinclair can play the part as well as Jen. The costume will fit her, and thanks be you made it and have it, not Jen." The play was put on that night before a packed audience. A delighted Sophie played Mary, and Mary, as Jen Pringle could never have been, looked Mary in her velvet robes and ruff and jewels, ruffles, I guess. Students of Summerside High, who had never seen Sophie in anything but her plain, dowdy, dark serge dresses, shapeless coat, and shabby hats, stared at her in amazement. It was insisted on the spot that she become a permanent member of the Dramatic Club. Anne herself paid the membership fee, and from then on she was one of the pupils who counted in Summerside High. But nobody knew or dreamed, Sophie herself least of all, that she had taken the first step that night on a pathway that was to lead to the stars. 20 years later, Sophie Sinclair was to be one of the leading actresses in America. But probably no plaudits ever sounded so sweet in her ears as the wild applause amid which the curtain fell that night in Summerside Town Hall. Mrs. James Pringle took a tale home to her daughter Jen, which would have turned that damsel's eyes green if they had not already so. For once, as Rebecca Dew said feelingly, Jen had got her comeuppance, and the eventual result was the insult in the composition on important happenings. And guys, hang on, let me see how much more we got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 more pages. So I'll stop there. Stop right there. Get back to my place. Okay, and we'll continue tomorrow. So I hope to see you today live at 5 Eastern. Bring your beverage of choice and your whatever you're working on if you want to. And let's have a good old chat. I still got lots of questions over here if we should need something else to talk about. And I am so sorry. Forgive me if I miss your comments. Sometimes the chat gets going so fast. I need to get in here and try to slow the chat down today. Maybe I'll remember to do that. Even if it's 50 or 60, it goes pretty quickly for me. Anyway, y'all be sweet. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. And my daughter's going to be here in a little bit. She's having her car inspected, which she does here. Like I said, she lives about 35 minutes away. But good excuse to come to my house and spend the night. I love it. As long as she doesn't cry about all my junk I got to I have picked up a little bit in the den, especially. But Lord, I hope she don't look in this craft room. I got to get a handle on this stuff. Okay, we'll see y'all later. Bye-bye. Love ya.